Hey folks, Kenny B here. So what this is an unused podcast. So let me explain. The French label Spectrum asked us to contribute podcasts, not audio commentaries, but podcasts for their releases of the youth dramas Lonely 15 and Spacked Out. We did both and sent off for translation into French, which they did for Lonely 15, and that Blu-ray is now available in France with our exclusive podcast discussion on the film. However, the time-consuming process of making French subtitles out of our English dialogue meant time ran out, and our Spacked Out discussion and review ended up not being used because of that reason. So it's being put out here in our regular feed instead. We introduce ourselves once I cut to this audio and follow the usual Podcast on Fire format. So I'm going to be brief here and say, for all your Podcast on Fire network needs, including our back catalog of this flagship show, Podcast on Fire, go to podcastonfire.com, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, and wherever you get podcasts. So this is current Ken handing over to past Ken and East Screen, West Screens Paul Fox for a discussion on the Johnny To produced category 3 rated youth drama Spacked Out. Welcome to the Spectrum Blu-ray of Lawrence Lau's Spacked Out. And this is the Blu-ray podcast that's going to discuss and review the movie and give you some background on the director. And my name is Kenneth Broson. I co-produce and co-host the podcasts over at the Podcast on Fire network, including the flagship show Podcast on Fire that reviews Hong Kong cinema, new and old, action or non-action. We do dramas and comedies and crazy, sleazy stuff sometimes too. And I also write about the variety of Hong Kong and Taiwanese cinema over on SoGoodReviews.com. And with me to talk this category 3 rated, meaning adults only, youth drama, although it's not a cheap, sleazy movie, is Paul Fox of the East Screen, West Screen podcast.
Hello, happy to be here, and I am also not a cheap and sleazy film critic.
Nor venturing to anything with the triangle and the 3 within it. You know which category 3 is for you, let's just say, and anything with those people called Charlie Cho is necessarily not for you. But if it's Johnny To doing category 3,
not always. I mean, what was the one he did with Chapman To? Wasn't that category 3? Flirting in thin air.
Floating in the air. It wasn't category 3, as a matter of fact. But they
wasn't. Oh.
They certainly did their best to do category 2 be naughty comedy. So
right.
3D Sex and Sen. Did you ever watch that?
I did. Yeah, that was a big one. That was
it sure was
kind of an experience not to be missed. So I did catch that one cinematically, as well as 33D Invader. But yeah, I mean it's typically not my genre unless it's something that's really funny. I like ones that are like really humorous, like The Gigolo. I thought was fun and just outrageous and silly. So if it's along those lines, it might pull me in.
So it doesn't need to be a sex movie just because it's category 3, and certainly Spacked Out is not this you've gone wrong wild movie that has a ton of softcore erotica. It practically has none of that. So we'll get into the reasons why it's even rated category 3. I can't say for sure, so I'm going to sort of ask my co-host here what his take is on why it was given the highest rating in Hong Kong. But Spacked Out is from director Lawrence Lau, and it's from from 2000. But I sort of slotted into the early works of Johnny To's Milky Way image, so I almost slotted into their 1990s output as they were starting out with Beyond Hypothermia and Expect the Unexpected, The Mission. But we were in the year 2000 here with Spacked Out. But Milky Way image, they were still they had hits. They did Running Out of Time a year or two before, but movies like The Mission were not like in the box office on fire, so they did romantic comedies to bring in some money to the company. And we're also experimenting with having other directors come in. And I suppose that's where Spacked Out comes from, bringing in a seasoned director, in the case of Lawrence Lau, and having Johnny To in the producing capacity only. So there's no imagery of completely still, stylish triads and their conflicts here. There's no cops and robbers dynamics. There's no Simon Yam or Lau Ching-wan here. So Spacked Out really instead goes for the depiction of the youth on the wrong track. And it seems like, going by credits, certainly going by what you see on screen, that this was a group of girls that felt new and nearly close to amateur actors, I suppose, well chosen to represent street girls, not prostitutes, but girls who walk the streets and could be believable. And even though these girls logged about 7 or 12 movies respectively in their filmography, it really feels like a new cast, a fresh cast, an amateur cast, and it certainly wasn't the first time Lawrence Lau had dealt with that aspect, nor youths in that dark manner, though, because his debut feature was Gangs from 1988, and prior to that he had studied film production in America, and he worked as an assistant director for Choi Hak on TV, and he directed himself, but Gangs was his first feature movie, and it depicted a gang of teenage boys, the gang sort of disintegrating, and that vision was dark. It was kind of relentless and not uplifting whatsoever, but it was sort of shot on a street level, real locations, shot in sync sound as well, and I'm sure Lawrence communicated his genuine concerns, I suppose. And I have some questions for you about Lawrence Lau, but I might as well stop there. Did you ever get to pursue Gangs, and if so, what was your impression watching it so long after it was made?
Yeah, I did see Gangs. I thought it's good for the sort of street level realism that it's trying to portray. Some of the interesting things about quite a few of director Lawrence Lau's films are that they might be labeled as kind of like after school specials, but for a more adult level, in that they're typically looking at issues in society where there are problems, whether they be delinquent youths, or issues with corrupt police, or guns, or drug use. And I think that he has a keen eye for doing some of that. It doesn't come through in all of his work, and sometimes he's gone over to genres that really are not his specialty. The one that kind of stands out in my mind is Even Mountains Meet, which he did in 1993, which is really film. Just like it's a good film, but it's an oddball film for him. I mean, because it's so much more like a standard kind of genre film for Hong Kong cinema.
It's a wacky comedy. It has musical numbers every now and again, and everybody they're acting like loons, these actors. So after having watched Lee Rock and Gangs, to throw this at a viewer, they might be a little bit shell-shocked that this was in the director.
The film he does prior to that, 3 Summers with Tony Leung, it's much more down to earth, and then that film comes along and it's like, whoa, we're kind of like moving over into nonsense comedy or Mo Tao, ghost movie genre area here. And it's like nowhere in his filmography to that point do you get a sense that he really wants to work in that more sort of traditional Hong Kong cinema genre.
Is that more awkward? Do you think he had trouble expressing himself within those brighter genres, if you will?
There's an interesting story for that movie, to be sure, on how he got assigned to it or why he picked it up. If it was the pressures of the era, because that's where commercial Hong Kong cinema was going, but it just really didn't feel like his voice was there. When you look at works like Gangs or Queen of Temple Street or the Lee Rock movies, you can find what I guess you would consider elements of popular Hong Kong cinema in a lot of those, but those very much feel like his works because of the way he depicts his characters and the way he uses camera work and things of that nature. So I think that when you look at a film like the film we're talking about today and a film like Gangs, you can see kind of the direct correlation with a lot of what he's doing. Now, Gangs is, as a freshman work, it's kind of rough around the edges. And, some of the there's problems with character arcs and things that I think are not always as clear as they could be. But I think that as you get into something like today's film, Spacked Out, you see how he's progressed as a director, and especially working with young people and young people dealing with issues and getting those narratives on the screen to come out and impact you as an audience member.
It was certainly appreciated in terms of critics and awards, because it was nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, but that year mainly belonged, and probably rightfully so, to Stanley Kwan's Anita Moy classic Rouge, because that's an eternal classic. That's also a technical showcase, and its atmosphere is alluring, and obviously Leslie is in it too, so it's not like this deserved the best director or picture compared to Stanley Kwan's movie, but it was nice that a small movie got a chance to matter there during awards season. You mentioned Queen of Temple Street, which is a drama about prostitution starring Sylvia Chang, so there's the commercial star in that one, and he also scored a genuine hit with the 2 Lee Rock movies starring Andy Lau, where his focus shifted to police corruption. And I only saw the first one way back in the day because the second one didn't have subtitles, so I think I wasn't that engaged in the movie, because I know I'm not going to be able to conclude this. Now that situation has been rectified, but back in the day, it's such a Hong Kong cinema home video crapfest that that 2 movies that are supposed to belong together, only one of them has English subtitles. So that was the problem there. But I might as well throw over to you any spontaneous thoughts on how Lau dealt in corruption, but he scored a commercial hit at the same time, because I don't remember if Lee Rock 1 was this super commercial movie that played to the audiences by being wacky in between the corruption stuff. I remember it as a fairly serious movie with a young Andy Lau at the time. So what's your memory of it, how he dealt with that material?
No, it's a film I revisited recently because, as some listeners may know, there was sort of a revisit of the character with the film Chasing the Dragon, which brought Andy Lau back as the Lee Rock character opposite Donnie Yen. So in preparation for watching that in the cinema, I went back to watch the Lee Rock films, and I really enjoy the first film. It's one that I think does a good job of portraying the era. I think Andy is very good in the role.
Do you remember, by the way, if they shot sync sound for Lee Rock 1?
I don't remember offhand,
because that would be neat. We didn't hear Andy Lau that much in sync sound prior to.
I want to say no, but I could be wrong. But as you mentioned, the sequel has existed on video for a while, but they had to redo it later on to get a subtitled version out there. I was able to see the sequel and the first film almost back to back when they got some theatrical play, and I didn't like the second one. The second one they bring in Aaron Kwok in a role.
I'm a police officer. I'm Aaron Kwok.
Yeah, it gets a little bit of gunplay going on, and the relation's kind of weird if you kind of understand the dynamic of who Andy and Aaron are as kind of the Heavenly Kings, the roles they kind of put them into in that film. And especially because it's supposed to take place over the span of decades as Hong Kong's police force changes under British rule and the establishment of anti-corruption bureaus and things. Through the second film, they're really putting Andy with some gray in his hair and some makeup on to kind of age him. And it doesn't really work all that well.
They didn't have the team that worked on Andy's old age makeup way later in Running Out of Time, but I gather that was like an external team from elsewhere.
Or if you look at him in the Chasing the Dragon, where he's kind of actually aged into the role, so he looks very different, but he still looks great. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoy the first one because I think the first one does a really good job of kind of portraying that early era Hong Kong. There's some really great art direction. And it's an interesting story. I mean, it's not completely based on history as I understand it, as I've kind of read elsewhere, but it's a very entertaining story nonetheless. And I even like the spin-off that Lawrence Lau did a couple years later with Arrest the Restless, which happens in that same sort of Lee Rock universe with a couple of the characters.
Yeah, I never realized that because I remember the movie and it was very solid. It was a 60s period piece, Leslie Cheung and Charles Hung, I believe. Yeah, that's interesting. I also remember it's one of those movies. I don't know why I remember this stuff, Paul, but it's Arrest the Restless is this movie where you see Fruit Chan in an acting role prior to his stardom as the director of Made in Hong Kong and Dumplings, but he's in there playing a fairly wacky character in Arrest the Restless. So it's one of those Hong Kong cinema memories for me. He could be Mr. Fun, as demonstrated in the wacky Even Mountains Meet, even though it might not have felt like a Lawrence Lau movie. I had a good time with that. I sometimes worry that these wacky Hong Kong comedies will be too broad and too local, and it will just fly over my head. But it had an energy about it that generated a fairly good time. He didn't do youth drama in this dark way or throughout his career, because he could do uplifting, sweet youth romance as well without being thoroughly commercial and sugary, I suppose, because 2001's Gimme Gimme, also for producer Johnny To, is one of my favorite Lawrence Lau movies. It works as this mirror opposite, I suppose, to Spacked Out. It's still a new cast. Some of them, at least now, are very famous. Choi Tin Yao is one of the actors in it. One half of Shine, the pop duo Shine, regardless if they're active anymore. I believe he's one of the halves of that. And it was a warm, sweet movie about kids. And who knows, Paul, if like after a decade or 12, 13 years of doing sort of mostly dark dramas, maybe Lawrence felt like, can I just do some sunshine in my movies for once, and but still stay true to my concerns, I suppose, or my subjects, I suppose. And I thought Gimme Gimme was a bit of a gem from producer Johnny To and Lawrence Lau. Not a movie that's remembered now, but I certainly liked it back in the day. Admittedly, I'm not fully caught up with his work in the new millennium. I did see his warm comedy My Name is Fame, that finally got Lau Ching-wan his first Best Actor Hong Kong Film Award, which was nice in the case of that movie, because he played essentially a struggling actor. And Lau Ching-wan, I think during the early 2000s, he wasn't... The dramatic material was kind of off his radar for a bit, and he became more of a comedic actor, and I don't think that suited him in the long run. It seemed to be just comedies for a while, and it wasn't landing very well in the case of all his comedies. But here came My Name is Fame, which, got him acclaim. And I'm not saying the story necessarily was written to mirror his life, but I don't know, at the time I felt it was right and fun and sweet that he got the Hong Kong Film Award for that movie. But it's also a very encouraging movie and uplifting movie, and it may not be that demanding or deep, but I really walked away from My Name is Fame really liking the film, and in the end liking the fact that he finally got a Hong Kong Film Award, and it was destined kind of to be My Name is Fame. So I'll throw over to you. Do you remember anything from that movie in particular that stands out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. It was great that he got a win. I think it also introduced us to his co-star, Ho Si-yan, who it was her first movie at the time, and she's since gone on to have a pretty solid career since then, which is great. It was an interesting look inside sort of the Hong Kong film industry, and cameos galore. And also, it's always nice to have a sort of peek behind the things you love, but you don't necessarily want to always see how the sausage is made, as they say. And I mean, story-wise, it was kind of following the A Star is Born kind of narrative, but then it has feet of its own. And I think if you're somebody who likes Hong Kong cinema and likes movies about movies, you will really get something out of that film for sure.
And I've seen a couple of the, I've seen his tactical unit movies. I believe he did 2, and these were not related necessarily, but they were, I don't know if you could define it as spin-off movies based on the Johnny Toe movie PTU. They don't deal in the same characters and characteristics all the time, but you can draw a slight thread towards PTU, I suppose. But they did like 5 of these movies called Tactical Unit something, and Lawrence Lau did 2 of those, but they weren't youth dramas, obviously. They were police thrillers, and they were solid enough, I suppose. But I wasn't that enamored with his co-directed drama City Without Baseball that he directed with the filmmaker that calls himself Scud. And he returned to harrowing youth drama with Besieged City, which I thought fell flat. I did not think he had a handle on communicating that material. It probably felt a bit preachy and simply not effective, even though he was pushing. It might have even been a Category 3 movie, if I'm remembering the DVD cover correctly, but I might be wrong. So I'll throw over to you. Are you familiar at all with those movies, the City Without Baseball, Besieged City, and have you followed his sort of last 3-4 movies? You know, he made a movie called Ballistic with Simon Yam, a movie called Rock On, and also a movie called Healer Dealer. So did you stay in touch with the filmography throughout the years?
No, not too much. I was not really interested in the tactical unit movies. Mostly those were kind of what you would call direct-to-video. I think they might have gotten 1 or 2 night theatrical release at a couple venues, but I didn't keep up with those. The only things I've seen of his most recent work was he does in the anthological horror film series Tales from the Dark and Tales from the Dark 2. He does have one of the segments is his, and here too he returns to work with secondary school kids, and he does the segment that is basically it's called Hide and Seek, and it's school kids who are playing in an abandoned schoolyard at night, you know, because why not, right? It's like it's the thing to do, and of course spooky things happen. Unfortunately, in the scope of, I think, all the stories that come out of the Tales from the Dark series, his is one of the weaker ones, not because it's technically bad, just because it's kind of doing things that anybody who follows the Asian horror genre will have seen before. You know, the kind of scares, the kind of things you do, especially in a schoolhouse setting. They've been done time and time again, especially in Japanese horror, but even in Hong Kong cinema, it was just seen as nothing really new, unfortunately. Dealer Healer, I have started on a couple occasions, but I have not had a chance to get all the way through. So I'm still working my way through that one. And again, here I think it's dealing with a subject matter that is familiar territory when you look at something like Gangs or Spacked Out, but I think it's trying to approach it based on what I've seen so far from a more reflective perspective. So I do think that's interesting. It's just every time I've kind of sat down to start it, something's come up and pulled me away, and then I've not gone back immediately because, you know, the source material isn't really gripping. It's not something that I'm saying, oh, I must watch it now. But it's there, it's in the pile, it's waiting to be watched.
Back briefly to Spacked Out, it wasn't nominated in Hong Kong for awards, but at the Taiwan Golden Horse Awards, the screenplay, the cinematography, and editing was nominated, as well as actress Debbie Tam, who plays the youngest of the girls, Cookie, was nominated in one category, but did not win. So we have reached our review and discussion of it, and as for my short opinion of Spacked Out, I've seen it before, but it's been many, many years, and it still captivates me through this raw, natural style. And it seems like it's just a random couple of days where they drift from place to place, but Lawrence Lau, I think, is good at making this immersive and not preachy or like an after-school special, and maybe that speaks to his experience by now, that versus Gangs. Maybe this has improved in that regard. But I think within all of this, there is a story about change, about process, hopefully progress. And while I dislike certain antics of the girls, you also wish them well. And I think Lawrence Lau ultimately does when depicting these topics and these subjects. And he also uses the new cast or amateur cast in some instances, I suppose, to good effect. I think he has a grip on that. So it's an effective one, at times a difficult watch, but not in the expected ways a category 3 rating might indicate, because there is no nudity here. But we'll get to our I suppose theories as to why this got a category 3 rating in a little bit. So I'm going to throw over to Paul. In short, what did you think of Spacked Out?
No, I think it's a really good look into again, sort of the culture of this era. And if you compare it with other films that are talking about this subject material, especially things come to mind like David Chang's Drug Addicts, and some earlier films of Lawrence Lau's like Gangs, that you get to see how the culture kind of has changed, but how certain aspects remain the same in terms of who's really being affected here in terms of their class, their social status. Are they coming from broken homes? What kind of family issues are they having? What kind of school pressures are they having? And I think that with a fairly new cast here, he gets some really amazing performances. What really shines for me is that he knows how to create a fairly compelling story that in some ways bounces from character to character, but it does so technically in a much more nuanced way than I think Gangs did. Whereas with Gangs, I had a hard time kind of keeping up with who was who initially. Here, I think he spends a good amount of time introducing each character, getting into the nuance of each character's personality and their relationship to the other characters, and then kind of telling a small story about each of those. So it's not, I mean, even though sort of Cookie, the Debbie Tam character, kind of has a central focus, you still get to know each of the girls in turn and their personalities in turn. And it's much more fulfilling, I will say, in that aspect than Gangs was.
Yeah, and even though I say it's a random couple of days of drifting from place to place, you're very correct that Lau does inject that nuance and adds to character through this structure. And as we said, he's not a crass exploitation filmmaker either. He's not here to perform gross scare tactics or anything. Here, I mean, sometimes you have to be in audiences' faces to get your point across, but he doesn't need to, because he's good at pushing buttons without it being over the top or anything. Did you like that period of Milky Way image from 96 up until this point, where they were really, they were starting out, they were sort of defining what kind of movies they wanted to do, but they sometimes veered off and made dramas such as this? So amidst your Expect the Unexpected, Longest Night, The Mission, running out of time, you had movies like this, Spacked Out. So is that a memory for you, thinking back on Milky Way's first few years?
So yeah, I think it's an interesting period to be sure. There are definitely some good titles in that late 90s era, although it doesn't appeal to me quite as much as some of the early 90s work, and so some of those films tend to remain a little bit more classic in my mind than the late 90s work. With this film being kind of an outlier, it's one that you can kind of look to and as a film that kind of stands out, but it has a story to tell. And I think it's, again, an important insight into the culture of the time. And, it still holds up really, really well. I mean, one of the things that was happening with Hong Kong cinema in this era, the director uses it a little bit here. It's some of the handheld video where they're kind of telling some backstory about a character who's Cookie's friend named Mosquito, and, how she's been kind of forced by her mom to go to this reform school. And we only get to see her in these video shots. And one of the things that sort of the look and the feel of this film and some of the intercuts to video reminded me of was that Hong Kong cinema, not too long after this, was really starting to move into video. And so you do start to get, maybe because it was a cheaper medium at the time than working on film, you do start to get quite a few productions that are shot on video, right? And I'm thinking of like Your Troublesome Night 18s and, some of the movies that were almost expected to go direct to video rather than get theatrical release, being shot on video rather than being shot on film. And you can still find these out there, in various circles, discs. I don't think you'd find them new anymore, but you can find them used for sure. And so this was a transitional time period for Hong Kong cinema, technically too. Well, of course, your big budget films, and especially stuff coming out of Milky Way, was going to be done on film. But to have a film like this, sort of intercutting in some of that video look, reminded me of the kind of changes that we're going through in this era.
And I suppose it's the biggest bombastic, stylish statement in the movie that he uses the flashbacks in this way by shooting them on video. I found it really appealing and certainly not intrusive, because he frames it initially with Cookie almost rattling off all the questions she has in her head to someone. It doesn't seem like an ongoing phone call, but she has a lot of questions. Do you like me anymore? Do you want to break up? Where are you, mommy? And then you obviously see the shots of her friend, and we get to have those blanks filled in. It certainly could have been. My radar went off immediately. Oh my God, here's the art director coming in. But I think he simply uses it in a non-intrusive way. It almost, because it's also handheld, and the movie is often handheld but not blurry as such. It feels like how he merges the handheld forward-moving story with the flashbacks, because they play a part of the narrative. So it might not have been a huge risk in his eyes to do this, but it could have also taken you out of the movie if you mix and match media too intensely and too frequently and try to make a stylistic, artful statement with it. I think Lawrence Lau has his eye focused on narrative here. It almost acts like an atmospheric thing, because it's a flashback and we know it distinctly because it changes from film to video. We recognize it distinctly that it's a flashback. And I thought it was fairly natural, fairly immersive as he captured these flashbacks, and also sad to a degree the more we find out about the story and how these girls feel inside about self-esteem and about the future and being separated, because friendship is a thing that grounds characters and at least keeps the demons away for a little bit, I suppose. And this friendship, even though we don't see much of it, it seemed to have meant something quite distinctly. So I think he uses it fairly well. So and he's never really been this artistic, stylish director. He never attempted to be Wong Kar-wai-esque, I suppose. So you really don't expect that from a Lawrence Lau movie in your experience, right? You're used to him doing straightforward drama with focus on characters, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think for some of the way he films the characters, you get some technical similarity to things he does in earlier movies, particularly with gangs. But I think that where this film is more successful is that he's able to make you understand each of these girls and kind of where they're at and what they're going through and the things they're dealing with, whether it's their home life or at school or their interpersonal relationships with each other, the things that are important to them, and all within sort of the context of contemporary Hong Kong of the moment, right? Because this was 2000 Hong Kong, and even today, two decades later, the likelihood is that the youth of today are dealing with similar circumstances, but in a very different manner, right? One of the interesting things that kind of stood out was there's a small moment where there's a drug transaction or some kind of transaction that's happening between a character called KK and another character called Bean Curd, and one is handing money over to the other, and she's upset because the money is in RMB or renminbi, which is mainland China money. And so one of the things they're talking about is these girls are, some of them are running goods over the border, over to Shenzhen, between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, because that's a way to make money especially with technology or, other things that might be illicit. And at the time, the Hong Kong dollar was a lot stronger than the renminbi, so nobody really wanted renminbi dollars. Of course, that's all changed today. So I think perhaps the reverse would even be true, right? That if, maybe not exactly, but it's interesting to see small details like this that he chose to focus on, and how very relevant they are because of the way that times have changed.
Do you think, looking at this movie, but certainly others, do you think there was ever a point where he was genuinely angry and wanted to provide a biting social commentary, or do you feel Lawrence Lau is more concerned and shows his heart rather than his fury? Because when I watch Spacked Out in particular, I don't see the anger, I see the concern he feels for characters like this, even though they're not always sympathetic, but they haven't put themselves in this situation purely. They are a product of, for instance, broken homes, and they don't wish for to drift and do these transactions, as you talked about. It's not necessarily their wish, and it's not the easy ticket into wealth or anything. So what do you take away from Lawrence Lau in terms of that? Is it concern or is it anger, you think?
I don't think it's anger, and I do think he's trying to cast a sympathetic eye on these girls and the situations they're in. And it's, again, to compare it with Gangs, because that's, his first work, I think it stands out more here because I had a much harder time kind of feeling any sympathy with the characters in Gangs, with the exception of maybe the character who's sort of the central character at first, although later my feelings toward him changed towards the end of the film. But here, I think he's really unveiling a lot about these characters and getting you to feel for them and their circumstances, but also getting you to kind of root for them and their relationships with each other in a way that, I mean, there's only a couple of moments where I thought he was too heavy-handed. Perhaps the main area, I think, is where there's a drug party a little bit, and I guess it'd be the third act of the film. And the character of Cookie is there, and she sees a baby in a fridge, and then a little bit later, a character kind of playing with this baby doll. It's a baby doll in a fridge. Let me just be clear. It wasn't an actual baby in the fridge. In a fridge, and then a character kind of playing with it. It's alluding to something that's very clear. I thought, yeah, okay, that kind of imagery I felt was maybe a little bit too pushy, but overall, throughout most of the film, I think he's approaching it with a fairly light touch. The girls get in situations where, in a more commercial film, in a film that was geared towards being more exploitative or sensationalistic, you would have expected a certain situation to emerge from that. There's a scene where the girls have gone to a photo shoot. And it had been so long since I'd seen this movie, I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute, is this going to turn south as you would expect in like a Girls Without Tomorrow film? Is this suddenly going to turn seedy? And no, it was like, okay, they're doing a photo shoot, and there were people there on set, and there was a guy, he was kind of sleazy, but it didn't go to that sort of next dramatic level that you would expect in a more exploitative or sensationalist storyline. So I think he pretty much through the most of the film, he keeps a fairly light touch. Now, that changes at the end, especially when we get into a sequence at an abortion clinic, which is very creepy, and a sequence that follows, which is very disturbing, but I think is effective storytelling for the character involved.
Mm-hmm, very much agree. And I do appreciate the documentaries style through the handheld camera work. It doesn't seem like there's strictly structured takes here where dialogue needs to be followed in a rigid way. I mean, I'm sure the girls needed to hit their marks. We certainly needed key plot elements to move forward through dialogue, but it seems like Lau and his cameraman made sure to give the girls space. But never forgetting that even loose scenes are to act as thread, I suppose. And that creates the notion that we get little hints of story here. But he's not anxious to plant huge story beats to confirm to us that I know storytelling, believe me, I do, and here's a big chunk of it. He seems very confident in just letting it unfold, dropping little beats here, and we're never really certain what events are going to move the story and characters forward or backwards, because it's a bleak movie partly. But having them hang in their environments, much of which seems like the camera crew are crammed into real environments. I mean, there's a scene in a bedroom. I'm willing to bet $1. That's not a set. That's a bedroom. And you need to cram in a couple of people in there. You know, sound recordist, cameraman, maybe director. And it looks like hell to shoot because it needs to look like a full room. I really like that about the movie, that it feels truly genuine that way without it being restrictive or anything. And they certainly shoot on the Hong Kong streets. I mean, for instance, you're a Hong Kong veteran, you've lived there. Do they shoot, for instance, Mong Kok as Mong Kok because they go to Mong Kok at one point, or is it not easy to recognize?
It's very easy. If you've been there, you can kind of get to understand where the girls are at. I think a good portion of the time is spent filming in Western Hong Kong and the Tsuen Wan district, but they do go to Mong Kok quite a few times. And with some of the more scenic shots, you can very easily see where they're at. There's a scene where they're like all coming down this very specific set of stairs, and that is the Mong Kok railway, the stairs that lead up to the MTR station or the East Rail Line for Mong Kok Station now. And it's very recognizable. It's I think spatially he's being very genuine with where would these girls go, you know, as, you know, teenage secondary school girls, what kind of things did they do? I think there's the scene with, I think it's Banana. She's kind of meeting a boy she's met online, and they're at a photo parlor, which, you know, those kinds of places are still in vogue today. The technology's improved a bit. But you go there and you take these, you know, silly photos with all kinds of little emojis and cartoony stuff on them, and they print them out as these little stickers.
And I'm sure, Paul, you have kept your entire collection of such photographs throughout the years, right?
I do. I have.
Because you have kids, man, so I'm sure they wanted to do some Hello Kitty emojis on top of photos and stuff.
There's definitely stuff there that's an attention to detail and realism that I think, from an outside perspective, you may not think it's a very big deal, but for a local person, that's going to say, yeah, this is genuine in that, you know, this is what the kids are about. This is what they want to do. This is where they spend their time. This is what they spend their money on. You know, they're going to go and they're going to sit in a dirty karaoke bar for a bit. They're going to play, you know, the Dance Dance video games like the girls do at one point. They're going to go hang out at the pool because that's a fairly cheap option. They're going to go, you know, be at the library because the library is free, you know. So, again, not to push too much on the sort of social income side of things, you know, and the class and whatnot. But, again, a lot of the situation that these girls are in, it's because they come from certain economic backgrounds and because it's indicative of the kind of environment they're in, especially when they're from a home that doesn't have a domestic helper to have eyes on them all the time because the parents are working or because the home is split, or as I think one of the girls even says, you know, my parents just stopped caring. They gave up, you know, because I was too much trouble. So, you know, I think that there's a definite genuine feel that exists. And I don't know if that was something that the director was able to get into as early as the script drafts, or that was something that he was just able to sort of pull out of the girls themselves.
He is a veteran doing bleak stuff, of course, punishing stuff, of course. And I haven't seen Gangs in a while, and you certainly have. But the way he depicts, for instance, the scene of self-harm in the classroom, which doesn't get any sympathy from, in particular, the Maggie Poon character who plays Bean Curd, the girl with the shaved head. It's simple techniques. It's not technically distinguished to anything. It's shot very straight and full on, but I think that makes it all the more effective that there's all of a sudden in that environment someone who is distraught to that degree. It never leads into thinking that the movie is too intense and is trying to make a point through being simply graphic or anything. It's also, I believe, just a random girl that does this, and then it happens later for one of the main characters. You flinch a little bit because Lawrence, obviously it's a dull knife, obviously, so, but Lawrence just depicts it as it's not slow, it's rapid. Cut. That stuff that makes you flinch, man. I mean, I'm used to gore in buckets, and that stuff makes me flinch, and I think that's a testament to how that is staged and the type of intensity that moment sort of deserves. But then we're quickly at various scenes of hanging out and going to places, so it doesn't matter for their particular day in school, you know. But it's an image that still stays with you, as does scenes of these young girls. You sometimes have to remind yourself these are not old girls. One of them is 12 years old, I believe. But they're even in that mode where they're comfortable flirting and being sexual and kind of carelessly stumbling into potentially vulnerable situations. And there's a wonderful sort of untampered, uninterrupted take with, I believe, Angela Au, who takes her date Andy home. And at one point she has to lead him through the living room where her mom is doing her makeup or brushing her hair, and she just wants to walk past her mother because that's obviously a home that is not filled with positivity as such. And she's sad for a moment, and then she brightens up as they flick through their funny photos that they took, and then they have a little honest mildly sexual encounter. It doesn't lead anywhere on screen. I wanted to single that out because I think it's technically a moment that thrives, because it's Lawrence's camera catching moments uninterrupted, and also he gets these acting beats out of his actors, and it feels genuine, as simple as it is to just look down and be sad, then look at your photos, that makes you happy. But he gets this natural vibe out of the actors despite. But you have to remind yourself that these are children, and that gets to you every now and again, that I don't want these children to be in these situations, but it's the current ticket in life, I suppose, all without resorting to category 3 stuff. We talked of that, why this is even a category 3 movie if it's not erotic or extremely graphic. And my only theory, I don't know that much about how you define category 3, the category 3 rating, if there's no erotica involved, because that's the automatic category 3 rating. But my theory as to why this got this adults only rating, it's the mix of drug use, language, and a fairly graphic scene of self-harm later in the movie. So that's my fears. I was wondering what you thought was the content that led this to be rated adults only.
Yeah, I think it's in part because you have a scene with characters that are clearly identified as minors. I think at one point they say that Cookie's age is actually 13. You know, they're very openly engaged in not just drug use, because, I mean, you do see drug use in other films. I think there was some minor drug use in Gangs, as I recall, and also in Queen of Temple Street, there's some drug use. But here, it's almost procedural in a very short scene. One of the things that I do recall from some of the censorship standards in Hong Kong, at least, you know, and again, these things change over time, is that certain procedural things, like certain almost how things are done, are problematic for the censor bureau. So, for example, in the Chow Yun-fat film Triads, The Inside Story, which is not an overly violent film as triad films go, but it has a Category 3 rating because it initially showed I think almost all of the initiation ceremony into a triad group. And that was considered, a no-no by the censorship board. So they gave it a Category 3. And so here I think it's a similar thing. Although I do wonder the very sort of next to last sequence we get, which happens in a clinic, that might also be pushing some boundaries for that era.
Yeah, with the on-screen depiction of the procedure, I suppose. Yeah. It's not like Milky Way were opposed to even touching the Category 3 rating in 1997, even though it wasn't a box office smash, but they did a movie called Intruder with Wu Qianlian, and it's a horror movie, a bit of a torture porn movie in a way, but a very good movie. So it's not like this was commercial suicide for them or anything to play with the free of it all. So they were struggling to make it like this commercial empire and had to resort to making, albeit fun, Andy Lau, Sammy Cheng rom-coms, and that got them some money, and then they built on that. And I mean, speaking of Milky Way, do you think they would ever even approach filmmaking like this today, or is that too experimental compared to where Milky Way are today as an entity? I mean, because they work in mainland China too, so there's those restrictions. So do they keep more? I mean, they did Trevisa, which I know at least brought in new directors and younger directors, but I don't know how experimental the story was in Trevisa as such.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at Trevisa as sort of experimental, particularly because of, and a little bit controversial because of some of the directors they brought on. But I don't know if Hong Kong cinema has I don't think it's in a place where it can make films like this anymore unless somebody's willing to make it on their own dime. I just don't think that the producers have the kind of faith in Hong Kong cinema that they did in the 80s or the 90s or even the 2000s after the handover. Today, I think a lot of the faith, at least from the producer side of things, has really changed. I mean, if it's something that's going to get play up north, then the likelihood is it's going to get a green light. But if it's something that's going to be controversial in any way, shape, or form, or is going to be deemed as artistic and your name is not Wong Kar-wai, then I don't think you're going to get a green light on it unless you've already got the funds in the bank.
Everything goes through stages, but we were talking an era here in 2000s where the automatic sort of stance wasn't to look towards mainland China for the majority of your productions that year as a company. They were still making Hong Kong films for the Hong Kong market, so there's obviously that change as you talked about. Just some minor notes on performances, and I liked the more lighter, sweet touches, because Lawrence Lau hints at infatuation, the sort of first love infatuation. Cookie at one point follows around this character called Lung Lai Yi. She's older, but they meet her at a swimming pool, and she eventually follows her to this classroom where there's information and brochures about possibly being an exchange student, and Lung Lai Yi is being interviewed and has answers for that, why she wants to go to Japan for an exchange program. And I love the little touch where Cookie, she has her own answers in her head to this, why she would want to go somewhere. And it's rather sad, Paul, because the default answer she has to herself as she provides these answers, they're about that I can't and I've never wanted. And what's the point, really, for me to think of any future prospect? And Lawrence Lau does this in voiceover, but it's a clever placement of voiceover, and the voiceover doesn't run rampant in the movie anyway. And it was a clever way of touching upon her sadness. She's resigned to have the same fate as at the age of 13 as the age of 17, if she even reaches 17, who knows. It's a moment where the actress, I think, earns her nomination in a way too, because she's very good. Debbie Tam, she has the look for the role, but she can emote without resorting to emoting, and the sort of the work in tandem with Lawrence Lau as he puts together these sequences on set and then in the studio for the voiceover. It really is one of the shining moments as he shows the cogs working internally in such character. And you just said that she's decided that she's no good. And I know that's part of growing up, and you think that's nothing else is going to happen. It's just bad, and a downward spiral, and it isn't like that. But I don't know, it's a well-chosen moment for such a sometimes intrusive device like voiceover. So that's my sort of second acting moment that I think stands out amidst the girls, and they're all good and they're all natural in their roles. But I think Angela Au and Debbie Tam's moments, the bedroom scene and this scene, I think that's a standout confirmation that these actors are within sort of logical dramatic range. They don't go off the reservation with the anger, and they're not awkward as they get into dangerous situations or have to play the lighter touches either. So really appreciated that. So I might as well ask any moments stands out from the little acting troupe here that you thought was well executed?
I mean, it's got lots of little moments between characters throughout that I think really stand out nicely. Some of the moments between the character of Tofu and her girlfriend, what's her name, Sissy, I think, or yes. No, that's the actress's name. They have some nice moments throughout, and you can kind of see how their relationship initially starts out and how that kind of changes over time. And I think that Banana has some very strong moments as well, just on her own. One of the strongest moments, I think, is the very final message of the film, that despite some dour events that have happened in the third act, there's a kind of hopeful message with the sort of ending scene with the cookie. And it makes the film a bit more endearing, whereas I think another film that might have ended on a dour note would been far less appealing.
Yeah, I suppose that confirms that Lawrence Lau isn't here to just poke, and this is life, deal, ending credits. So you're right. That's why I always came out of Spacked Out thinking that his heart beats for these characters, and he doesn't see doom and gloom everywhere he goes, but he's honest about what they do go through. And I agree that the latter sections that go into these manifestations of Cookie's internal train of thoughts, and that's then manifested visually before us because she's thinking about a baby. Stylishly, the movie hasn't done this that much, and I don't think the drug party scene is the excuse for this, because it doesn't seem like Cookie has ingested whatever type of drug they have ingested, or taken a lot of pills, and she's not walking around in a daze and, oh, there's a baby, ooh, I have a baby in me. Like she seems sober, if anything, and that he pushed a little bit too hard, but it didn't make me care less for her plight, if you will. So it just stands out and that scene was intense anyway. So it was a bit edgy, the sort of drug den that they've gladly walked into, I suppose, because it's not the first time. At least the majority of the time, the majority of the girls do drugs. So they're stages to life, and they don't need to be all negative. And I think that's what Lawrence Lau leaves us with. And I think the way he does so is not manipulative and too sugary. He's matter of fact with it in a way that we're not necessarily ready for the fact that, oh my God, it ended in a positive way. He kind of throws it at us. And I don't mind that choice after having been subjected to tough and edgy stuff. To sort of go, boom, this can happen. Look at them. Oh, and we sort of shaken out of our days a little bit. Oh yeah, it can be okay. It looks like it's okay now. So I don't know. It's one of those. It looks simple. You shoot it in a simple way, and if you edit it in a certain way, then you can get the desired reaction out of an audience. Having gone from high to lows and then to a little bit of a high. So no wacky freeze frame ending. If the trademark of Wong Jing here, but there's certainly a little trick here as the credits roll, and it's neat. It's well done. So you don't think of the fact that you watched a Category 3 movie necessarily considering how it ends. Like, oh, this was an adult movie. So yeah, it's neat, and it holds up after so many years. Like neither Lonely 15, as we've talked about, nor this, they haven't aged in that in any particular way where it's distracting that fashion is old-fashioned and technology is old-fashioned. I think that they overcome such things quite easily because the stories are the focus rather than their particular phones or their particular fashion or anything. So I don't know. It never got to me, the fact that so 2000s. Yeah, I never got that feeling,
Yeah, no, I think that there's one moment which may date the film a little bit, is that there's a scene where the girls are riding on the bus to, I think they're heading down to Mongkok, and they see the big long Tsingma bridge that goes over to Lantau Island and to the new airport. And they shout at the bridge something about Leon Lai and they miss him or something. And then they say some lines. And I tried to do a bit of digging to see if that was a reference to a song of his or something. And the only thing I could come up with is that he did a song called Happy 2000 in the same year that this film came out. And in the music video for that song, he actually is shooting some of the scenes for that music video on the Airport Express, which also goes along the Tsingma line and runs to the airport there. It's one of the newer MTR train lines. My guess is that it might be a reference to that video or a song from that album that was from the same year, or maybe something else. But that's my guess, because I could not for the life of me figure out why they were shouting about Leon Lai and the Tsingma Bridge. And
why are they not talking about the other Heavenly Kings that are much better? Damn it, girls! Damn it!
Yeah, I think for the content and for what it's showing for the era, and even technically, it holds up really, really well. The subject matter may not be for everybody, but I think it's presented in a way here that's not too heavy-handed, so that people will be entertaining and they will find good performances with the girls as well. There is a movie that I can't really recommend because I haven't seen it, though I've talked to people who've seen it, that sounds like it's along similar lines that was done in 2015 called Lazy, Hazy, Crazy. It is also a Category 3 film, and I believe it is about school-age girls and, discovering their sexuality and other things. So it may bear some similarity to this, but I honestly can't speak a lot to it because I haven't seen it myself. But I've heard from people who have seen it that it's not all that great, but it is something that's along the lines of, this same kind of genre. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more updated, that goes along with this film. And I can recommend one film from around the same time period, and that is the 2003 Singaporean film by Royston Tan called 15. It is the number 15, which was his first film. He's done a couple films since then and made a bit of a name for himself as a Singaporean director. But this film, 15, follows a handful of teens who are gang members in Singapore, and it is an acted piece, but he pulled these kids, who are real gang members, to fill out these roles.
Wow.
And it's got very similar themes and in some ways a very similar technical style. to Spacked Out. And if, again, this is something that is of interest to you and you haven't seen it, you can try tracking that down as well.
But let's finish this one off then. Thank you everybody for listening, and hope you got something out of our discussion, and hope some information was of interest to you, and the context, talking of older films and newer films, and I hope our review notes played some importance to this discussion. We did the best we could at the best of our abilities, trying to research these things that are not hugely documented through extensive making-of documentaries and the like. But regardless, hope to speak with you all soon. And for Podcast on Fire, my name is Kenneth Bosa, and with me was Paul Fox of the East Screen, West Screen podcast.
Bye-bye.